Look in the mirror. If your eyes are green, stop for a moment, because you are looking at something almost no one else on Earth gets to see looking back at them. Here is a strange place to begin. In forensic labs around the world, there is a tool called IrisPlex. It was built by a team at Erasmus MC in the Netherlands and published by Susan Walsh and her colleagues in 2012. And it does something that still sounds like science fiction. It reads 6 markers in a sample of DNA and predicts the color of the eyes that DNA belong to, without ever seeing a face, without a photograph, without a witness. Hand it a blue-eyed sample and it says blue, and it is almost never wrong. Hand it a brown-eyed sample and it says brown just as confidently. Hand it green, and the most accurate eye color predictor ever built goes quiet. It hesitates. It hedges. On the intermediate shades, the greens, the hazels, the colors that sit in between, the same model that nails blue and brown with near-perfect accuracy suddenly can't commit. And it isn't because the science is sloppy. It's because green, it turns out, is not a simple thing to be. By most estimates, only around 2 people in 100 carry it. Rarer than blue, rarer than brown, rarer even than red hair. And the reason it is rare is tangled up with the exact reason a machine can read almost everyone's eyes but stalls on yours. 2 mysteries that turn out to be the same mystery wearing different clothes. So where does a color like that actually come from? Not the postcard answer, the real one. Because I promise you, it does not begin where you would guess. And by the end of this, the trail is going to take you somewhere you would never have thought to look. This is the channel where we follow the history written inside the human body. Not the version on the surface, the version underneath it. If that is the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe, and let's follow this one all the way down. Here is the first thing that is going to rearrange how you see your own reflection. There is no green in your eyes. None. There is no green pigment anywhere in a human iris. There never has been. The same is true of blue. Your body does not manufacture a green dye and lay it across the front of your eye like paint. What it makes is one thing, and one thing only: a brown-black pigment called melanin. The same melanin that colors your skin, the same melanin that colors your hair. That is the entire palette you were issued, one color of ink. So how on earth do you get green? You get it the same way the sky gets its color. The sky is not blue because there is something blue up there. It is blue because of the way sunlight scatters as it passes through the air. The shorter, cooler wavelengths bounce around and reach your eye, and you read the whole dome as blue. Your iris runs the same trick. Pack the front layer of it with melanin, and the incoming light is soaked up before it can scatter. You see brown. Strip almost all of that melanin away, and the light scatters back out of the tissue, cold and short, and you see blue. There is no blue pigment doing it. It is structure and light, nothing more. And green? Green is what happens in the narrow space between those two. A little melanin, not much but not nothing, sits in the front of the iris. That thin scattering of warm brownish pigment overlaps with the cool scattered light coming back out, and the two mix, and your eye reads the result as green. Warm gold laid over cold blue, blended in real time, every waking second. Green is not a color your body owns. It is a color your body borrows from the light. A little pigment, a little scattering, caught in the act of overlapping. That is the whole of it. That is the entire magic trick. And it is worth holding that word, borrowed, because we are going to come back to it. Which is exactly why the machine struggles. Blue is an absence, almost no pigment at all. Brown is a presence, a lot of it. Those two are easy to read straight off the DNA because they sit at the far ends of the scale, and DNA is good at ends. Green lives in the middle. It lives in the thin, unstable band where a small difference in how much melanin you make tips the whole color one way or the other. There is no single letter in your genome that spells green. There is a dial that sets how much melanin the eye floods itself with, and green only appears when that dial lands in one specific, delicate, in-between position, nudged there by a scatter of smaller genetic settings rather than thrown by one clean switch. So if we want to find where your green eyes come from, we cannot go hunting for a green gene. There isn't one to find. We have to follow the dial instead, and the dial has a story, one that runs back further than any country you could point to on a map, to a single moment in a single body, thousands of years before anyone alive was born. Almost every pair of light eyes on this planet, every blue one and every green one built on top of blue, traces back to the same tiny stretch of the human genome. It sits beside a gene called OCA2, the gene that does much of the work of making pigment for the eye, and it is governed by a switch in a neighboring gene called HERC2. That switch is the dial. Turn it down, and the eye stops flooding itself with melanin. Leave it up, and you get brown. And here is the part that stops people cold when they first hear it. When researchers looked closely at the people who carry the turned-down version of that switch, the light-eyed, they found something almost eerie. In the blue-eyed, it is not merely similar DNA, it is the same change. The same letter, altered in the same spot, in the same short stretch, repeated in person after person, across the whole of Europe and far past its edges. Not many people who each arrived at pale eyes on their own, by separate accidents. People who all inherited one single change from one single human being. A team led by Hans Eyberg at the University of Copenhagen traced it back and drew the only conclusion the evidence would allow. Somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago, one person was born with that dial turned down. And every light-eyed person alive today is, in the most literal sense, reading from the copy that one person left behind. We will never know their name. We do not know if they were a man or a woman. We do not know if the strange pale eyes made them an outcast in their own band, or something people walked for days to come and look at. We know almost nothing about them at all, but we know they lived. We know they survived long enough to have children, and we know those children carried the dial forward, because you are holding the proof of it in your own face, right now, this morning. Think about the arithmetic of that for a second. Trace any family tree back far enough, 200 generations, 300, and the branches stop spreading outward and start folding back in on themselves. The same handful of ancestors begin appearing again and again, thousands of times over, because there simply were not enough people alive back then for it to be otherwise. One of the people sitting in that tangle, appearing over and over in the deep roots of 500 million family trees, is the person the dial began with. You do not have a distant, tenuous connection to them. You have an unavoidable one. Now, your green eyes are not a clean copy of that one ancestor, and this is exactly where green parts ways from blue, and where it becomes more interesting, not less. Blue is the dial turned nearly all the way down. Green is the dial turned down, very often carrying that same ancient change, inherited from that same deep root, but then nudged back upward, just a fraction, by other and smaller genetic settings. A touch more melanin than a blue eye holds, nowhere near enough to reach brown, the exact narrow in-between. So green is not a separate lineage with a founder of its own. Green is what happens when that ancient turned-down inheritance meets a scattering of modifiers and comes to rest in the middle of the scale. You are carrying the old change and the fine-tuning at the same time. That is precisely why no machine can call it cleanly. When IrisPlex reads a blue eye, it is reading one strong signal at one end of the dial. When it reads yours, it is trying to read a balance, an old switch, plus a handful of quiet adjustments, all landing together in a window so narrow that a nudge in either direction would have made you blue or made you brown. You are, quite literally, the sum of more than one setting. And hazel. Hazel is that same balancing act pushed even further into ambiguity. An eye that can read green in one light and brown in another, shifting with the sun, refusing to hold still long enough to be named. The color the model finds hardest to predict is, in a sense, the color that is hardest to be. And for a long time, that was roughly where the science sat. One main switch, and a vague sense that other, smaller things nudged the color around it. Then the studies got bigger. In 2021, a consortium of researchers, including scientists at King's College London and at the very same Erasmus MC where IrisPlex was built, did something the earlier work never could. They compared the DNA of nearly 200,000 people across Europe and Asia all at once, and put a blunt question to the genome. How many genes does it actually take to make an eye its color? The answer was not 1. It was not 6. They turned up around 50 genes that had never before been tied to eye color at all. 50 separate places in the DNA, each making its own small contribution, each pushing the dial a hair up or a hair down. Blue and brown, the two ends, still came down mostly to that one ancient switch. But the middle, the greens, the hazels, the ambiguous in-betweens, turned out to be written by committee. Dozens of tiny genetic voices, each casting a vote. And green is simply what it sounds like when they happen to land in rough agreement, in that one narrow register. So the machine was never really failing you. It was telling the truth. When IrisPlex stalls on a green eye, it is not making a mistake. It is honestly reporting that the color was decided by more inputs than 6 markers can hold. The rarity of green and the difficulty of predicting it are the same fact seen from two sides. Green is uncommon precisely because it needs so many small settings to line up at once, and it is hard to predict for exactly that reason. Which leaves the obvious question hanging. That one ancestor, the origin of the dial itself, where were they? And here is where almost everyone, quietly and confidently, guesses wrong. Ask most people to picture the birthplace of pale eyes, and they will picture the far north. Scandinavia, fjords, snow, pine forests, blonde hair. It feels right. It has the ring of something obvious. It is also, as far as the ancient DNA can tell us, not where the story begins at all. When scientists learned to recover DNA from the skeletons of Europe's ancient hunter-gatherers, people who lived 7,000 and 8,000 years ago, long before the continent looked anything like the postcard, they pulled out a combination that nobody had thought to draw on any chart. In a cave in the north of Spain, a man archaeologists call La Braña was sequenced by a team publishing in 2014. He carried the turned-down dial. He had striking pale eyes, and his skin was dark. Dark-skinned, dark-haired, and light-eyed, all in the one body, all at once. Years later, the same picture rose out of the ground in Britain from the roughly 10,000-year-old remains known as Cheddar Man, pale eyes set in dark skin. Read that in the right order, and it changes everything. The pale eyes came first. The pale skin came later, thousands of years later, carried in by other people on other migrations. The fair northern face you might have pictured is a recent blend, assembled long after the fact. The eye is the old part, and it did not begin in the ice and the pine. It began further south and further inland, in hunter-gatherers who would look to modernize nothing like the assumption we quietly attach to a pale iris. And from there, the dial traveled, because this is the engine of the entire story. A single inherited setting does not sit politely in one valley waiting to be found. It moves the way people move. It goes wherever bodies carry it. Those ancient hunter-gatherers met and mixed with farmers spreading out of Anatolia in modern Turkey, who brought their own pigment settings with them. Then, around 5,000 years ago, a wave of herders swept west out of the vast grasslands north of the Black Sea, the people geneticists call the Yamnaya, and reshuffled the genetic deck of the entire continent. Each of those migrations picked up the dial, carried it, concentrated it in some places, thinned it out in others, and left behind the map of light eyes we still see today. Not as the badge of any single people, as the residue of everyone who ever crossed that continent and stayed to raise children. And it did not stop at the edge of Europe. The same turned-down setting surfaces in places the postcard never prepared anyone for. Along the old trade roads reaching east into Central Asia, in communities scattered through the high mountains of the Hindu Kush and the Pamirs, where a green or a gray eye set in a face otherwise nothing like the European stereotype still stops a traveler in their tracks. The dial went wherever people carried it, and people carried it a very long way. It never once checked a border. It never asked which language a village spoke or which god it prayed to. It simply rode along in the bodies of the living, surfacing again wherever that old inheritance happened to meet the right mix of modifiers to tip an eye toward green. Sit with that for a second. Every one of those surfacings, the pale eye in the mountain village, the green eye 1,000 miles east of where you would ever have thought to look for it, is the same signal. Not a coincidence. Not a color that was reinvented over and over in separate places. The same ancient dial, turned down long ago in one person, still working its way outward across the whole of the human map. Still legible in strangers who would never in their lives think to call one another kin. There is one more thing worth sitting inside before we bring this home, and it is the quiet miracle underneath all the science. For that one change to reach you, it had to survive everything. 6,000 years at the low end, maybe 10. Every famine in between, every war, every plague that emptied whole regions, every migration that scattered families to opposite ends of a continent, and every stretch of history where a person born looking a little different might not have lived to pass anything on at all. A single altered letter in a single stretch of DNA threaded through hundreds of generations of people who had no idea they were carrying anything at all, and it held. It made it through all of it. It did not have to. Countless other small changes, born in countless other people, blinked out and were lost forever. This one didn't. This one is looking back at you from the glass. And that leads to the strangest fact in the whole story. The one that quietly undoes the assumption people carry about eyes like yours. We tend to treat a rare trait as a kind of certificate, proof of belonging to some older, narrower, more particular line than everyone else's. Green eyes especially get read that way. But look at what we have actually followed here, step by step. The color isn't in you, it is borrowed from the light. The origin isn't a green gene, it is a turned-down dial you share with hundreds of millions of blue-eyed people you will never meet. The birthplace isn't the frozen north you pictured. It is a dark-skinned hunter-gatherer in a Spanish cave. And the spread isn't some private, sealed European inheritance. It is a signal that leaked across an entire continent and out the far side into the heart of Asia, carried by every migration that ever passed through. There is nothing pure about it. There is nothing sealed or narrow about it. Green eyes are one of the least self-contained things a human body can produce. An in-between shade, built out of borrowed light and one ancient shared switch and a scatter of fine adjustments, appearing in faces that look nothing alike, among peoples who have spent whole centuries insisting they were separate from one another. The trait itself does not believe in the categories we sort ourselves into. It never did. So let's bring this all the way back to you. If you are sitting here with green eyes of your own, or hazel ones, here is what they actually are. They are not a mark of rank. They are not a rare bloodline you were fortunate enough to be issued at birth. They are a color your body never made and only ever caught. Light and a little pigment, meeting in a window so narrow that the finest predictor humanity has ever built cannot say for certain the meeting will happen at all. And they are old. Older than any nation that has ever claimed them for its own. Older than any flag that has ever flown over the places they are common today. The switch behind them was thrown before there were countries to be from, in one person whose name is gone, whose face is gone, whose entire world has crumbled into dust, and yet whose single small change survived every last thing that has happened since, and arrived, intact and unbroken, in your reflection. That is the part worth keeping. Not that green is special because it is scarce, that it reached you at all. And that having it does not mean you are anyone in particular. It does not mean you belong to some group the way a passport says you do. What it means is the opposite. Every other person on Earth with a green eye, or a hazel one, or even a plain blue one, is reading from a version of the very same inheritance. Which makes them, in the most exact sense the word will bear, your distant cousins. Not as a warm figure of speech, as a real, traceable line of shared descent, written in the one part of you that never learned and never cared about the borders we drew on top of it. The categories we use to divide each other are loud, and they feel permanent, and they feel like the deepest thing about us. The DNA underneath them is quieter, and it is far, far older. And it keeps telling the same patient story to anyone willing to follow the trail all the way down. That the very thing which makes you feel rare is also, at the same moment, the thing that ties you to everyone. Green is not a color you own. It is a color you borrow. From the light, from the dead, from a long line of people you will never meet and are related to all the same. Look in the mirror one more time. That is not a badge looking back at you. It is borrowed light. And it has been traveling toward this exact moment for 10,000 years. If you followed this all the way down, subscribe. We trace a new piece of the story written inside the body every week, and there is a lot still left to find.